If we've ever said we know what to do, but we just don't do it, it's not because we're lazy. No, it's not. It's because our brains weren't designed to change everything at once. But you know what? They can learn with the right rhythm. Many of us start a healthy lifestyle by literally writing long lists, right? So like drink water, go to the gym, eat better, sleep early, which to be fair, all really valid points. But the truth is the brain doesn't change well under pressure, especially when our dopamine system is overloaded. So here's the science. Dopamine is the brain's seeking chemical, right? So it's not just about pleasure. It actually drives motivation, craving, and behavior as well. So when we scroll endlessly, eat snacks without hunger, or basically just jump between distractions, we're teaching our brain to chase instant highs. And then when we finally try to sit down and plan healthy meals or go for that walk we're meant to go for, it just falls flat. Not because the goal is wrong, no, but because our brain's reward system is noisy. So what helps? A dopamine reset. So not a total detox, because that's just unrealistic, but a gentle pause, right? So we might reduce background stimulation, for example, turn off autoplay or step outside without our phones, or even sit with some silence and just take it all in. So this isn't about deprivation. Honestly, it's not. It's more about resensitizing our brain to smaller wins. And the result is basically those first healthy choices, you know, the glass of water, the stretch, the journaling, they actually feel rewarding again. So from a psychology perspective, this taps into something called reward prediction error. So when we stop flooding our brains with easy rewards, we basically increase its sensitivity to effort-based dopamine, which means we feel more motivated by things that actually support us. So what's powerful is this: we don't need to feel inspired first. We need to feel clear. And when we gently reset our dopamine inputs, our clarity and our lifestyle starts to follow. Okay, so next is start with a measurable habit. So example, let's talk about water. Our brains love visible progress. They just do. And a bottle that shows how many milliliters of water we've drunk, or how far we are from like the finish line or finishing the bottle, that's not just a design feature. It's not. It's a behavioral cue. So it basically activates a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps us monitor progress and make micro adjustments when needed. So now here's why this actually matters. When we try to change too much at once, like eat cleaner, move more, exercise, we pretty much overwhelm our working memory. So if we start with something measurable, like drinking water, for example, and just a bit more each day, we activate the brain success loop. So we see progress, we feel good, we keep going. There's also a deeper psychology here, right? So small trackable habits build something called self-efficacy. And this is the belief that we can influence our own outcomes. And self-efficacy is basically a strong predictor of long-term change. How cool is that? So we could make this visual by using a measured bottle, or pairing it with an existing action. Like every time we check our emails, we take a drink of water. So the goal isn't perfection. It's not. It's building evidence that, you know what, we can actually follow through when life gets busy. And when we see progress in one small area, the brain's reward system spills over. So we're more likely to prep a healthy snack, right? We feel more grounded. We start thinking, hold on, maybe I can build a healthier routine after all. Like maybe it actually is doable. So one thing we can hold on to is this: visible habits basically build invisible confidence. That confidence becomes the quiet engine of our lifestyle reset. Okay, so next, let's talk about meal prepping. So it's 6 p.m, we're tired, hungry, overstimulated, and just staring at the fridge like it's a riddle or something. That's not just a bad habit, it's a cognitive overload. So our brain's executive function, right, especially the part that helps us plan, inhibit impulses, and make intentional decisions, gets fatigued fast, especially after a long work day. That's why eating well often feels hard, especially at night. It's not that we lack discipline, it's that we've used up our brain's planning energy earlier on in the day, which is something researchers call ego depletion. But here's the workaround, right? And it's not becoming a full-time meal prepper. It's not. It's partial prepping. So maybe on the weekends, like you chop up all your vegetables, right? And then what you could do is like cook double portions for dinner on the previous day, and then you can save some for the next day. Or even just prep 2 base ingredients in advance. We basically reduce decision-making friction. We quiet the emotional noise of what do I feel like? And we basically protect our evening self, right? The tired version of us, from having to perform a miracle. So from a neuroscience perspective, this strengthens our working memory buffer. When we reduce meal-related decisions in the moment, our brain is freed up to basically focus on other habits like rest, movement, or just like winding down. And emotionally, we feel proud, right? Nourished, we feel clear, which basically creates what's called a positive feedback loop, where our healthy choice basically encourages the next one. So basically, the goal isn't to control every meal, it's about trying to honor our future self, the version of us who's tired but still wants to feel cared for. Okay, next, here's something we don't hear enough. Willpower is real, but it's not reliable. It's not. We've been taught to basically believe that healthy people just try harder, which maybe they do, but according to decades of psychological research, willpower works like a muscle, right? It gets tired, especially under stress, sleep deprivation, or emotional strain. So that's why we can honestly wake up full of good, healthy intentions and still end the day watching Netflix and having snacks like we didn't even plan to eat. Okay, so what works instead? And it's this energy management. We start by asking, when in our day do we feel most clear-minded, for example, or emotionally stable, or even alert? And that's when we can place our high friction habits like workout, food prep, or decision-heavy tasks. And why is this? Well, do you know what? Because we're not asking ourselves to choose in the moment. We're just following what we already decided when we felt clear. And here's the deeper emotional truth. When we expect ourselves to just push through, we subtly almost shame our natural limits. But when we plan around just being human, honestly, we can protect our capacity, and that's not weak, that's wise. So the strongest change doesn't just come from pushing harder. No, it's about designing a life where we don't have to, because our systems are already in place. Okay, so one of the most wildest things we can do when we're starting a healthy lifestyle in a good way, when I say wild, is basically to pause. So not like long meditations or silent retreats. However, if those work for you, go for it, stick to it. When I say this, I'm talking more about tiny resets that soothe the nervous system and remind us who we are. So our emotional brain, especially the amygdala, is wired to stay alert, right? So it scans for problems, threats, and unfinished tasks. But when we pause, even for 60 seconds, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is sometimes also called like the rest and digest mode. So the pause can look like listening to gospel music, for example, that helps us breathe again, or whispering like a short prayer as we walk to the kitchen, for example, or sitting on the floor and just letting our shoulders really just drop before we keep going. So these micro movements aren't laziness, they're basically rewiring. They strengthen the connection between our prefrontal cortex, which is the brain's planning center, and the emotional brain, which is creating calm, grounded decision making under stress. Next is rewire through repetition, not perfection. So it's so tempting to wait until like we feel ready before we try to start, being healthy. But our brains don't rewire through like the perfect day. They rewire through consistent ones. Neuroplasticity, which is our brain's ability to change, isn't sparked by intensity. It's basically sparked by repetition. So each time we take the stairs, for example, instead of the lift, each time we pause before reacting, each time we decide to partially prep a meal instead of like ordering out, we fire a pattern. In cognitive neuroscience, this can be described as long-term potentiation, which is the strengthening of connections between neurons, right, when they're activated together repeatedly. And you know what? Here's what's hopeful. Those changes don't care if the action is small, right? They care if it's reliable. So from a psychological angle, we're also reinforcing self-trust. We're teaching ourselves, I do what I say I'll actually do. I follow through, even if it's one glass of water that you said you'll do, or one prayer before bed. So instead of asking, how can I be perfect this week? We could ask instead, hold on, what's one habit I'm willing to do even on my worst day? Our brain remembers patterns, not promises. And you know what? In the end, the healthiest lifestyle isn't the one that looks the most impressive. It's the one that keeps showing up again and again until it becomes who we actually are and it's part of our identity. Okay, so moving on, we talk a lot about what we eat, what exercise we're doing, but how often do we actually talk about what we're consuming, like emotionally and visually? So every time we scroll, binge, listen, watch, our brain is forming associations. We're activating neural pathways which are linked to desire, comparison, safety, and stress, right? And those pathways don't shut off just because we want to be healthy. So here's where this becomes practical. If we follow 10 accounts about crash diets, we subconsciously anchor our goals to punishment. But if we follow even 2 or 3 accounts that feel peaceful, grounded, and realistic, we might start to reshape what healthy looks like in our own minds. So this is called priming in psychology. So our environments, even our digital ones, influence what we think is normal, desirable, or achievable. So when we consciously curate our inputs, we change the emotional backdrop of our day. So the brain also uses something called salience tagging. So it flags information that feels emotionally charged or personally relevant. So if we flood it with chaos, confusion, or noise, those things feel important even if they're not. But if we consistently feed it calming, affirming, or value-aligned content, that becomes our baseline. So for instance, we might decide to change the podcast we listen to normally on our walk, or maybe we unfollow like the loudest voice and subscribe to a more peaceful one. So it's not about living in a bubble. It's just more about protecting our emotional landscape. So what we see shapes what we seek. And sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is basically change what we let in. Or just curate a bit more about what we're letting into us. Next is make rewards meaningful, not just instant. So one of the biggest mistakes we make when building a healthy lifestyle can sometimes be thinking that rewards have to be massive or flashy, like, oh, I'll buy new clothes once I lose weight, or I'll book a trip if I stick to my workouts. But our brains don't hold onto distant rewards very well. They just don't. So here's the neuroscience. Dopamine, the brain's reward chemical, right, spikes whenever we anticipate something rewarding, not just when we receive it. So if our rewards feel too far away or disconnected from our effort, our brain won't link the habit to a sense of success. Instead, we can use immediate meaningful rewards. So this could be as simple as having like some really nice herbal tea after a workout, for example, or calling a friend after we've done like our partial meal prep. So what really matters is the emotional weight of the reward, but something that feels nourishing, not numbing. From a psychology angle, this links really well to intrinsic motivation. So we're more likely to repeat a habit when we actually enjoy the process and not just the outcome. So maybe we listen to something we like whilst we're getting ready for the gym, or putting on music whilst, we're doing stretching. The key is to basically make the healthy act itself rewarding, not just the thing that comes later. So ultimately, the healthiest habits are the ones we don't have to bribe ourselves to do because they feel like a reward all on their own. Okay, so we often think that motivation comes first. So I'll work out when I feel ready. You're going to be waiting a long time. But science tells us the opposite. Movement creates motivation. So this is tied to embodied cognition, which is the idea that our body and brain are in constant dialogue. So when we move, even just like gentle stretching or taking like a 5-minute walk, we signal safety and activation to the brain, and that signal often sparks the mental clarity we were waiting for. And there's also a chemical shift. So movement increases blood flow, which basically boosts endorphins and can even really like regulate neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So what I'm trying to say is the very chemical we thought we needed before we can start can basically show up because we started. From a psychology lens, this is linked to behavioral activation principle. So when we first act, even in a tiny way, this basically updates the brain. Our brain updates its predictions. So it's basically like, oh, this is who we are now. Okay, we're the kind of person that moves. Let's go. So we don't have to start big. Sometimes the win is really just standing up, putting on trainers, or doing 10 squats. Those small actions prime the brain for the next step, and suddenly motivation follows. So one thing we can hold on to is this: motion isn't the result of motivation, it's the seed of it. Right, so no matter how prepared we are, resistance will show up. The brain doesn't love change, it loves predictability. So when we start a new routine, our nervous system sometimes can fight back, and we crave old patterns, so we make excuses and we delay. And you know what, that's normal, and it doesn't mean we failed. Absolutely not. So here's the psychology. Resistance is partly cognitive dissonance, right? The discomfort we feel when our actions and old identity no longer align. The key is to not avoid this tension, but to plan for it. So this is where recovery rehearsals come in, and we can ask ourselves, what will I do on the days I don't feel like it? What's my 2-minute version of this habit? What's my way back if I miss a day? So cognitive neuroscience tells us that when we imagine and rehearse future scenarios called mental simulation, we basically build neural pathways that help us follow through when we really need it and when reality hits. We can also anchor this in kindness to ourselves, right? So instead of something, it's not going to plan and you say, oh, I've ruined everything, you can just say, actually, well, I didn't really mess up too bad. It was just a little bit of, an error, and I'll get back on track. So the difference between people who succeed and those who quit isn't that they never fall off track, is that they've practiced getting back on. Okay, by the time we've built even a few healthy habits, we often start asking, hold on, how do I keep this going? What more can I do? And the answer isn't to do more. It's about protecting what you've already grown and what you've already built, right? So healthy lifestyles aren't just physical, they're also emotional. And peace is the foundation. So when life gets noisy, you can lean into your faith, right? Ask the Lord to protect your peace so you can continue the healthy habits that you've implemented into your life and that you can sustain them. Ask the Lord to keep allowing you to say yes and give you the willpower to say yes to healthy habits and no to bad ones. But ultimately, something that's amazing is that our habits aren't just about doing, it's about being. And when we protect our peace or lean into our faith, we give our healthy lifestyle a place to thrive. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one. Bye.